Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we're going to take a look at taxiing. We're going to see how we taxi the Airbus around, as well as learn some tips and tricks for navigating around using the taxiway signs at some of these big international style airports. As always, I am a real world Airbus pilot, but none of this is for any use in the real world, it's just to give you some extra context in your home simulations. Here is our A320 Neo parked up at Heathrow. Heathrow is one of the airports that has pretty good signs and markings because it was included in some versions of Microsoft Flight Simulator, but we're also going to take a look at a couple of other airports throughout today's video to try and give you an idea of how these signs work. Before we get started today, I would like to mention our sponsor for today's video, the SoFly Guide to Flight Simulation. The SoFly Guide has been written to give the basic starting point for anyone brand new to flight simulation coming into the hobby thanks to Microsoft Flight Simulator. It goes through the setup as you can see here. It even covers updates to the simulator such as one of the recent patches including the Japan update, and now includes a very basic A320 Neo tutorial flight. It's available on digital format from the SoFly website, and I'll provide a link in the description. For today's video I will be using the fly-by-wire A32NX mod for this project, which I've done other videos on, and I will also provide a link in the description too. However, it will be applicable whether or not you're using that or another simulator. This is going to be a bit more generic, where we look at taxiway signs and some of the things that we do with the Airbus. What I'm going to do is, as you can see, we are parked up here at Heathrow, and I've set this up with a ATC flight plan using Microsoft Flight Simulator's flight planning tool, and it's got a clearance to fly us to Amsterdam. So I'm going to get my IFR clearance because that way it seems to work better, and I can get my taxi clearance from the control system within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Okay, so we have our clearance there. I've put in 12,000 feet as our stop altitude, even though on the SID it's slightly different to that, and I put in the squawk 6225. Now they're telling us to call them when we're ready to taxi, which is going to be the main content for today's video. In reality, it doesn't quite work like this. You'd call up your ground frequency usually to get permission to push back. So let's get ourselves pushed back, and I'm just going to do a straight pushback, and then we'll get our taxi instructions. So we're requesting pushback. We need to get our beacon on, check that those thrust levers are definitely closed, windows are closed. Here comes the tug. I've noticed that if you can't get the pushback option here, then it could be that you need to get your IFR clearance. That's what I've had happen to me a few times. So that seems to be the current way it's set up. Now in reality, the ground crew would of course call you up and tell you to release your parking brakes. They'd never just start driving you, but here we go. You'll notice some things like the slides lights here. This is all from the mod, so it is I really recommend using the mod if you're going to fly the Airbus in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It does occasionally break when they update one of Flight Simulator or the mod, but it typically gets fixed very fast. Right, away we go. So they should tell us to release the brakes. So there we go, brakes off. And back we go. Now, in real life, you get told a direction usually, or you would tell the ground crew the runway. So we're going to runway 27 left. That's what we've been cleared for. So there is a way to have an idea of what we're doing. If I press V and bring up the VFR map, I can see that I'm going from 27 left, which is down here. So I'm going to want to face south effectively. So I need my nose to go to the right. Or I can push straight back, which is what I'll do now, and then put my aeroplane there when I get cleared to taxi. But in reality, they don't usually push you straight back. They usually turn you one way or the other. But those controls can be quite difficult using the default system. So I'm just going to push straight back. Okay, now we are pushed back. We're going to start up the engines. So, mode select to norm. Phalanx powered, starting engine 2. Okay, that engine started just fine, so we can reset our timer. Again, that's part of the mod, and we'll start engine 1. Okay, so that's 2 good engine starts now. They're all stabilized, so what we can do is stop the timer. That's done. Set the engine mode selector from ignition start back to norm. Then on the overhead panel, I'm going to turn off the APU bleed. I don't need the APU for my departure today. I don't need the engine anti-ice either. And if we come down here, I'm going to arm the ground spoilers in case of rejected takeoff, reset the rudder trim to 0, and set my flaps, which I've set to 2 in the MCDU, to 2. I have videos on the MCDU setup. I'm also going to work on a video on a full cold and dark setup as well at some point as this mod improves, so that will hopefully be one of the near future videos. So do please subscribe if you would like to see that. Right, let's put the transponder as well. That should have really been in auto as we were about to push back. Okay, and then we'd also set the trimmer to the takeoff trim, which is not displayed at the moment in here, so we won't get too concerned with it, but in the green is where it needs to be. So now we are pretty much ready to taxi. But there's a few things we should really get clear in our minds of what we're going to do next. So I've already shown you that if you press or bring up the VFR chart, which is you can't press V when you're in drone view like I am, but there we go. Have an idea of where you're going. So we know we're departing from 27 left down here. So I'm expecting to need to turn right and head along one of these taxiways and down to 27 left. The hardest part in Flight Simulator at the moment is the initial part of taxiing because we don't know which taxiway we are starting on, but I'll give you a few ways you can see that. First of all, if we look over here, to find out which taxiway you're on, you need to find one of these little taxiway marking signs. And as you can see here, now this seems to be a bug of a piece of baggage trolley I think has appeared there. This Foxtrot sign tells me that I'm on taxiway Foxtrot because it has a black background with the yellow writing. The yellow background with the black writing is the next taxiway. So this is on Foxtrot, which is where we are. And if I turn left after this sign, I will go into Lima 36. That's one way you can do it. Another way, of course, is to look at your own chart. And there's another sign here proving that I'm on Foxtrot. If we zoom down here. So here's another sign proving that we are on Foxtrot with the Foxtrot here, Lima 35. And as you can see, this is actually just behind where we push back. So it's quite well signposted here, but it's not always going to be. So if you have an idea of where you need to go, then that'll be your first clue. One alternative is to use Navigraph. So this is the Navigraph app I have displayed right now on the screen. And you can see that we push back. I think we were on stand 319. So this is taxiway Foxtrot here. And the Lima 36 and Lima 35, we can see link 36, link 35. You often need to go into the parking stands chart when you're doing this, parking stands. And there's other taxiway charts, for example, taxiing, but that's for the 380 to show you where you can go. And here's a taxiway chart, but as you can see, it's not quite as specific, so it's a little bit more confusing around the parking gates. It's good for an overview, but you'll need to go into the parking stands one to work out exactly where you're starting from. So we've got a good idea that we are on Foxtrot and we want to go south to 27 left. As I said, we can back up where we are by looking at these signs around us, even if we don't have Navigraph. So I can tell I'm on Foxtrot, so I'll get my taxi instructions shortly. Key principle here, as I said earlier, the black box with the yellow writing is telling me the taxiway I'm on. The yellow background, the Lima 35 in black writing, is telling me what comes next. So if I turn right, this is taxiway Foxtrot. If I turn right, I'm joining Lima 35, otherwise known as link 35. I can prove that with this next sign over here, still on Foxtrot, which we would expect to be because we haven't turned. But if we turn left at this next part, we're going to join Bravo, either left or right, which is why you need to know where you're going in general. So I'd expect a taxi instruction something like Foxtrot and then Bravo, in which case I would know I'm going here. They may in real life tell you a direction as well, north, south, so take Alpha, south, that sort of thing. If we zoom over here, we can see that Foxtrot carries on. So what happens if we don't turn left or right onto Bravo? Well, you guessed it, we're going to get another sign with a little black square telling us we're still on Foxtrot, and then the next taxiway, which is Alpha, which runs left and right along here. So if we were told Foxtrot then Alpha, we would ignore Bravo, carry on Foxtrot until we see Alpha. And now, as soon as we go past this sign, the next left is going to be taxiway Alpha. So that's the really basic principle you're going to need to know before you can taxi around using those signs. And as I said, we typically use the charts mostly. And then the signs just confirm what we're expecting from the charts. So it's a balance of the two, but it is possible to use just the signs in Flight Simulator if you need to, because I appreciate that not everyone is going to have Navigraph subscriptions. Here is an important part though, stop bars. This is something we must be aware of. So you'll typically taxi following these yellow lines along the ground. So your nose wheel, or you should have the center of the aircraft over this center line. And these are lit with green lights, which you can see are lit up here, although typically in the daylight they turn them off in most airports. The edge of the taxiway will be marked by blue lights. These don't always have to be there, but they're quite common, especially in bigger airports like Heathrow or Amsterdam, where we're going. So the blue lights are the edge markers for the taxiway. And here you can see again, this is Lima 34, and left and right would be Bravo. What we have over here is a stop bar. So this is warning us that there's a runway ahead, and it's hugely important. It's a huge issue, a runway incursion it would be called, if you were to go over the stop bar when you weren't cleared to, and there could be an airplane down there trying to take off or land. So this is marked very clearly, big red writing, and that's typical in real life. But crucially, you've got not only the 27 left 09 right written here to warn you, you've got these lines. You've got the double solid line and then the double dashed line. And the reason it's like this is to tell you, you cannot go over this line in this direction. So coming from the direction we're coming from, as if we were taxiing along like this, we can't cross the solid line because we would be entering a runway. The reason it's dashed on the other side is because if we were coming off the runway, so you can see here, this is the runway 27 left. So if we landed and we were following this line, we can actually come along here, and then we have a dashed line because it's a vacating. So we are allowed to go through it because there's gaps in it. So we can go through here, and then we're on the other side. But you cannot cross a stop bar entering a runway. Obviously, you must be very careful. So these will be at every entrance to a runway, wherever you are. They also, in real life, often have red lights fitted to them. And sometimes just flashing amber lights to warn you that they're there, but they're made as visible as they possibly can be because they're just so important, especially in low visibility where air traffic control, who will be up in their tower over there, that's quite a long way away. So in fog, they may not be able to see us down here, or airplanes taking off and landing, we may not be able to see. So how would we get to the other side of the runway? What if we landed on a different part of the airport on the other runway and we needed to taxi across here to go and park over here? Well, we would have to hold at the stop bar and wait for explicit clearance from air traffic control. In real life, that usually means you'd have to talk to the tower frequency instead of the ground controller, but you must wait for permission before crossing one of those or lining up on the runway. And you can see more red lines here because, again, these are more stop bars. Now I want to take you from here, which is about halfway down the runway, and we're going to zoom down, apologies for the speed, to the holding points for runway 27 left. And as you can see, as we get closer over here, we've actually got more lines. So we have our original stop bar, which we've already talked about up here with the double dashes. And then we have these ladders, they're often called. Now there shouldn't be quite as many markings. That looks like a bit of a graphical glitch, but they seem to have doubled up. Let's go over to this one here. It's a little bit better maybe. But what these are is the low visibility holding point. So you can think of it as if you're doing a Cat 2, you get the 2, Roman numerals of 2. So this is what this is showing us. So if it's foggy, you don't stop at this line, you'd actually have to stop at this line. And the airport would tell you low visibility procedures are in force. Now, this is quite complicated stuff I'm talking about now, but that's just what those lines mean. So unless they tell you or it's nice weather, you'd expect to go to the normal holding point. But if it's foggy or low visibility procedures are in force, you'd be going to the Cat 2. So you can see here, November 2 Echo is where you'd be cleared, whereas here is November Bravo 2 Echo. And we get the nice red sign warning us there's a runway on the other side. Very important. Whilst we're here, I'd just like to show you a couple of other details. If you look here, we have runway 27 right, and there's these yellow chevrons marking before the piano keys or the start of the runway. So this is the runway threshold here. What these lines mean is we can't use this part of the runway. We can't land on it and we can't take off on it. It's not for us. So that's why there's these yellow chevrons warning us that. So this is the start of the runway here. So a full length departure from here, you don't go onto this, you would go here onto the piano keys as they're called. So at this end we have runway 09 left. And instead of having those yellow chevrons before the threshold, we actually have these arrows. And there is a difference. With the arrows, you can't land on them, so they don't count as part of your runway for landing. The landing runway starts here, so we'll fly over this area and then touch down somewhere within these white markers, the touchdown zone. But you can take off on these arrows. So if you were lining up here, you can't take off until you get onto these arrows, and now you're on the takeoff runway. Why do you end up with this situation? Well, it's usually because there's some sort of terrain or something on final approach that means that it would be unsafe to have airplanes lower, because of course if you're landing here, you'd be lower here. So things like that would cause it. I'm not actually sure this is how it's set up at Heathrow, but anyway, there we go. So 09 left, you have the display threshold in here shown, so you can take off on these arrows, but you can't land on them. The final thing I'd like to show you before we finally get taxiing is this yellow cross. This means it's closed or unusable. So this suggests that you cannot vacate here. You can't use this bit of taxiway. It's unavailable, the yellow cross. So if you see that anywhere, then that is not usable piece of tarmac for you. Back on the flight deck now, and we are ready for our taxi finally. We're going to call up air traffic control now and request taxi IFR.
Heathrow ground Airbus India. Sierra India Mike X-ray with India ready to taxi IFR. Airbus India. Sierra India Mike X-ray taxi to and hold short at runway 27 left by a taxiway Foxtrot Bravo Lima 28 November 1 Bravo. Contact tower on ONE 24.
Okay, there's our instruction. So let's read it back. Acknowledge taxi clearance, which is what you do in real life. You always read these things back because any clearance you have to read back what you're actually cleared to do. And it's Foxtrot Bravo Lima 28 November 1 Bravo, and our call sign. Now I've got progressive taxi turned on just to show you these blue arrows out here. This is a feature that if you're brand new could be really helpful, and it's in assistance and navigation aids, taxi ribbon they call it, and I've got that set to on. But we're going to see that we don't need it. It's possible to do it without that, but I'm just going to leave it on just so you can get a clear idea of what I'm doing. So before we taxi then in the Airbus, what do we need to do? Well, of course, we want to turn on our taxi lights up here, so the nose light goes to taxi. Also, we're going to turn the runway turn-off lights on. Now, that's not necessarily required, but the reason you might do that is because the nose wheel taxi light doesn't turn. It only points straight ahead on the Airbus. On some aircraft, it's fitted to the part of the nose wheel that actually turns. So as you turn around the corner, the nose light points around the corner. On the Airbus, it doesn't. So these will actually shine round, and it makes you a bit more visible. These aren't too bright. They're not as bright as the landing lights or the strobes. So the first thing is Foxtrot. Well, we know we're on taxiway Foxtrot because we've checked that already. If I press for my charts, I can see that obviously I need to turn right to go south, and that's how I'm going to get to 27 left, which is what we're cleared to. If I bring up my Navigraph chart, what I can see on that is that the Foxtrot runs from here. We take Foxtrot down, and then Bravo, so left onto Bravo, which we've already seen the sign for. Then Lima 28, which will be Link 28, which is somewhere further along, I think. So we're going to go to our taxiing chart. As I said earlier, there we go. Link 28 all the way down here. Link 28. So Bravo, Link 28, and then November 1, Bravo. So Link 28, November 1, November. What do they call it? November 1, Bravo. Well, pretty close. So that's how the chart can help you. So now we know exactly where we're going. If I get rid of the VFR map and I get rid of the charts, we will still manage, and I'll show you how. So before we go then, we've turned on those lights, we've had a look at our routing. Then you're going to want to look around very carefully. In real life, we make sure that we've waved the ground crew away, so you get away from them as they leave, which they have now done. We're going to release the parking brake off, and the rear aircraft might start rolling forward slightly at this point, or you may need to use a little bit of power. Now we need to make a sharp right turn to make it onto Foxtrot to point south, which we can look here as well. You know, we know we need to go south, so it's going to be a right turn. So I'm going to spool up the engines a little bit, never more than 40%, and in a crowded area like this, probably not even 30%. And as soon as the aircraft is moving, taking a bit of thrust there to get going. Flight Simulator seems to need more thrust than the rear aircraft. It does tend to move on its own quite easily. But now we've got ourselves moving, get our right turn in. We want to do a brake check fairly shortly after we get moving, but if you've got a sharp turn to do first, you don't want to do the brake check until you've actually made it round the turn, because the risk is you'll get stuck whilst turning, and you don't want to stop whilst you're turning. There we go, that's too much thrust there. Obviously it takes more thrust when you're in the turn. And you've got to be mindful taxiing these aircraft around always of what's behind you. You don't want to be blasting 40% N1 at the terminal behind you if there's ground staff who've just, you know, pushed you back, things like that. So let's get that thrust back down and under control. And we're on Foxtrot, as we said, Foxtrot. And now I can look for Bravo. So I'm on Foxtrot if I'm going down here. Bravo is the next one on the left, just as our blue line agrees. So taxi along, here we go. So I'm going to leave a bit of thrust on. You don't have to bring the aircraft to a stop when you do a brake check. What you're doing is you're just checking that the pressure stays at 0 down here. So there we go, there's the brakes applied, and it does. So we'll keep moving. Then, well, let's look at our next instruction. We're following Bravo all the way to Lima 28, Link 28. So let's do that. It should be pretty straightforward because we've already seen it on the taxi chart, but we can just follow the signs outside. We don't want to go onto Alpha. We want to go onto Bravo, so we're taking our left turn here. And then we're going to be looking out for Link 28, our next sign we need to look out for. But as I said, having a good idea in your mind of where you're going is going to make your life a lot easier when you do this. So now we're carrying along Bravo. What about taxi speeds? Well, we need to use our ground speed, GS. Our airspeed indicators won't work because they rely on airflow, and they don't work when there's not enough airflow. But the ground speed uses those IRSs above us to work out how fast we're moving over the ground. So at the moment 7, meaning 7 knots. In a straight line, anything up to 30 knots is reasonable as long as there's no other local restrictions. Some airports will have their own speed limits. And even 30 knots is not necessarily an absolute rule. It's just typical airliner sort of SOP, about 30 knots in a straight line. For turns, 90-degree turns like these, if I was turning right here, probably about 10 knots because you have crew who could be at the very back of the aeroplane standing up or doing safety demonstrations all the way back here. And obviously, if I turn the nose, the back is going to swing around quite a lot. So keeping it smooth for the crew is very important. Well, same with the brakes. You don't want to stand on the brakes while people could be standing up or moving around the cabin. The trick with the Airbus is in the real aircraft, it tends to slowly accelerate even at idle thrust. In the flight simulator world, you have to actually keep adding thrust to keep it moving. So it's slightly unrealistic, but in the real aircraft, you leave it at idle thrust and it will gradually accelerate up towards 30 knots. When it reaches 30 knots, you'll apply the brakes and slow it down all the way down to maybe 10 or something like that. Just get it really slow and then release the brakes and let it accelerate again. The reason is these aircraft use carbon brakes and they wear mostly through number of applications and when they're cold. So if you keep applying lots of little applications of the brakes to try and keep it, 25 to 30 knots, dabbing the brakes a lot, you'll wear them out much faster than if you just apply it once and hold it there to let the airplane decelerate all the way down. So 30 knots in straight line, 10 knots for tight turns, maybe 15 knots for some wider turns like the link at the end here. It wouldn't be too unreasonable. Now we're moving as well, we can do our flight control check, which I have shown in some other videos, but that is typically done on the move in the Airbus. I know Boeing sometimes do it before they go anywhere. So side stick full left, full right, neutral, full down, full up, and neutral. As I've said before in videos, you'd expect this arrow to go all the way into the white box to show it has travelled, but it doesn't quite do that yet. And the rudder. The real aircraft, we can press the rudder pedal disconnect. And that way we can actually move the rudder pedals without the nose wheel turning. However, that's not quite available yet, or I haven't found a way to do it. So you may do it at home, but here we go. So I'm just going to go right down really slow and then go full right rudder and full left rudder. And that all works. You'd probably do it slower than that in real life. And also you would, like I say, have the pedal disconnect. So when you do that, the airplane carries on straight. We get a little bit of nose wheel steering in the real aircraft from the rudder pedals. Most of it comes from this tiller. So it depends how you have your control axis set up in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Once we've done our flight controls, you'd have probably some sort of brief on the way out to make sure that all your modes are correct up here. Again, this is all using the mod, which is why I have some of these screens which aren't available in the default aircraft. Check your stop altitude, check you've got the performance figures set, which doesn't quite appear yet up here. And we can turn on our weather radar if we think we're going to need it. We can set the TCAS to TARA, which you would do, and we can make sure that we have max auto brake ready for the takeoff. In this mod, we bing bong the cabin crew, and then it says cabin ready, and we need to press takeoff config test. I've talked about that in my takeoff tutorial, what that means. And now we start to see our first sign of Link 28, Lima 28, Bravo, and then straight on is Lima 28. I'd have to turn left to stay on Bravo. So that's what we're going to do. When you're taxiing the aircraft, if you're not sure what you're doing, bring it to a stop and then work it out. That's the big mistake. It's very tempting to keep the aircraft moving and not want to actually stop. Also, in real life, of course, there's two pilots, so one person can keep looking out at all times and driving the aircraft, and the other person can help by looking at the charts and so on. Right, Lima 28, we are now on it. It's now the black sign, so all as promised. And we're not wanting to join Alpha, which is the next one, but I can see over here, Lima 28. So that's where I'm going to be going. And then November 1 Bravo or November Bravo 1, whichever way it's called today, is going to be over there. Something I want to show you is how do we keep the Airbus on the center line. Well, what you want is this yellow line to be running, and it's easier if you do this, running in between these two screens. So I'm going to turn around this turn. On the turns, you might want to oversteer a little bit, which means get the nose wheel slightly ahead of the line, so the main wheels are roughly over the middle. And now, if I get that line running in between the two screens like that, pretty much in line, that should, if I go external, be pretty close to on the center line. There we go. So that's the way we do it in the real aircraft even. That's typically the easiest way. Here we are then, just arriving at our holding point. We were told cleared to November 1 Bravo. If I look outside, November 1 Bravo is here. As we saw earlier, this is the Cat 2 low visibility stop line. It would typically have signs next to it as well, but we're cleared to November 1 Bravo. So this has, there you go, there's a sign, slightly different name. Now you'd be surprised how far forward you can go, but you don't want to put any part of the aircraft over this stop bar. So I'm going to put it here and set the brake, and I think we will be plenty clear of that line. We can't put any part of the aircraft over this line. So let's jump into external view and check that's the case. And there we go, look at that, way back. It's amazing how much further back you are than you realise. So let's, in the outside view, just get our nose right up to the line. Sometimes air traffic will want you to be pretty close to the line, but they don't want you going over it. Very important you do not go over it. In some airports, for example Milan and Arte, they have sensors that actually scan across and can tell when something crosses, because it's so important it doesn't happen. So there we go, that's still okay, we're still behind the line. If I jump inside, that's where it looks like out the window. It's yeah, it's quite surprising. This feels slightly exaggerated to me, but that anyway, that's just to demonstrate the point that yeah, it's quite hard to judge where the nose of the aircraft is, because you sit very high up in the Airbus. Okay, now we're going to tune to Heathrow Tower and hopefully request takeoff clearance. In real life, ground controllers would probably give you the frequency for the tower, and you'd also not have to request clearance for takeoff. Usually they'll ask you when you're ready and then tell you to take off. They know you want to take off, so they don't need you to request it typically. A clearance, so we must read it back. And we're cleared for takeoff. So, looking outside, before we cross that line, let's make really sure that there's no one out there. So you look all around, both ends of the runway, make sure no one's doing anything silly over here. Then we're going to stick on all of our lights. Strobe lights go on, landing lights go on. The taxi light goes to takeoff, which makes it even brighter. And you may give a signal to the cabin crew, that's quite common. And we're going to get ourselves onto the runway. We are clear for takeoff. To prove to you that this system can work, we are now going to depart from Amsterdam. As you can see, we have done our pushback and our engines are running. We've also done our after start flow. So let's see if we can find our way out. Just to get an idea of where we are, if I press V and bring up the VFR chart, I can see I'm going to need to turn right to get out of the apron. So that gives me a good clue on where to start. Of course, as we said before, if you go to your Navigraph chart, it becomes a little bit clearer where you are. Yeah, we're starting just up here. Right. let's get our taxi clearance. Okay, there we have it. We have our taxi clearance. We're going to 36 left, which is the furthest away. Now again, always easier with the full charts, but I know 36 left is over here, and I can actually, they do actually write it even on these. So there's 36 center, and all the way up here is 36 left, and it's got our flight plan drawn on it. So the first instruction is taxi to and hold short of 36 left. That means go to it, but don't cross that stop bar, which we talked about earlier. Via taxiway Alpha 9 Charlie and Alpha, then Alpha 16, Bravo, Charlie, Charlie 3. So that's a lot of instructions. They wouldn't normally give you so many at once. Some airports will have standard taxi routings that you don't need to be told all of this, and you can actually follow the charts have it written on. So green is our center lines, and we need to get onto Alpha 9 Charlie. So we're going to need to turn right. We are going to be on, I think, Alpha 9 anyway, and then we need to join Alpha. So let's take a look. Now, as I've said in previous videos, the dome light is on because we need the ground crew to see us, so they'll wave at us to say goodbye so that we can make sure we've all seen each other. And then we're going to switch it off for the taxi or to dim. Sometimes people leave it at dim in case of a rejected takeoff with a loss of electrical power. Let's turn on the runway turn-off lights, which you can see light up out the side down there, which is very useful. And of course, our taxi light lights up in front of us. We check all around. It's clear on the left, clear on the right. Same again then. Parking brake is released. So there we go, Alpha 9 Charlie. We can see that that's the taxiway we're already on. Let's bring back our instruction then. The magic of flight sim is we get it written here the whole time. So we're going to need Alpha 9 Charlie to join Alpha. So, as I can see here, Alpha 9 Charlie, where is it then? First left, join Alpha. Now it could be to the right as well, and that is one of the things that they would normally give you. Well, they could give you direction, but we know where we're going because we need to go up and around to this other runway. So there is a bit of context required in the flight simulator land at the moment. So now it's the same again. So we've got to run our flight control check and we're going to look out for, we're on Alpha 16 we're looking for now. You can start to get an idea. We have Alpha 10 here. So Alpha 16 is probably going to be a bit further along. We've gone from 9 to 10. So we just need to make sure we stay on Alpha. And here we go. Alpha 16 is the right turn here, and then I can see the black Alpha 16 up there, so we need to turn right here. Again, looking out all the time, you have to be really careful. Airplanes don't maneuver well on the ground. It's also of note that if it is soaking wet outside, like it was supposed to be for this part of the video, then you need to just be even slower for the turns because the nose wheel will slide, especially on the yellow line, which is painted. So you've got a lot of weight on the main gear and not as much weight on that nose gear, and you can end up with it being very slippery. Right, so Alpha 16, Bravo we're now on, as this sign tells us, and we're going to stay on Bravo until we reach Charlie. The nose wheel is, these are two small wheels, and if they have to take all the strain of turning, especially with a, this could be an almost 80-ton aeroplane, it's got a lot of momentum, so in the wet it will just slide, especially when you're trying to park on stand. You have to be very careful in the wet. Same for vacating the runway, obviously. The next instruction is one of the reasons I brought us to Amsterdam. As you can see, Charlie 3, cross runway 36 center, Whiskey 5. So they're actually clearing us to cross a runway. Normally, controllers, unless the runway is not in use, they may clear you straight away if it's not in use. Typically, they'll clear you to cross the runway when you get a bit nearer, or they'll tell you to hold short. Either way, you want to be very careful with a crossing runway clearance. Make sure you're definitely cleared across before you do it. So I'm looking for Charlie 3, which I think won't be too far away. I actually think it could be here. Let's see, what does this sign say? Charlie 3 to the left. So we're going to take Charlie 3, and that's going to take us to cross runway 36 center. So we're expecting to see those stop bars. When you cross the runway, there's a few things you want to do. You want to focus. Make sure you're looking out and around so that you're not missing if someone is on approach to the runway, or somebody else is, they might have made an incorrect approach or not realised they're approaching the wrong runway. Here's Charlie 3. We seem to run out of lights over here. Let's see what we can find. Oh dear, it's a bit disappointing. Well, there should be all the stop bar signs, but there's obviously not quite loaded into Microsoft at the moment. Then you're going to want to turn on your strobe lights, and some airplanes will put on their landing lights, although because we're pointing across the runway it's not as useful, but I can show you how visible we become on the outside here. You can see now we are really lit up, and the strobe lights in particular are very important for this, so they should highlight us to anyone trying to land on this runway. and you want to get yourself across. You don't want to be distracted doing checklists or starting engines or anything like that. If you were doing a single engine taxi, you want to get yourself safely across and over the line on the other side. You can't call runway vacated until you're over those lines that we saw at the beginning of the video, the hold short lines. So that does happen in busier airports like this. Now we are across, let's turn off those strobe lights, and we can put the landing lights back to off. In the Airbus you can leave them at off and they'll just stay sort of extended, it doesn't really matter. And now we can continue our taxi over for our departure from 36 left at Amsterdam. I really enjoy taxiing the Airbus around. It's something that is very unique to the job. It's a very satisfying feeling to have control over a 90-ton airliner in some cases and be just driving it around on the ground. It's a really enjoyable part of the job. So even some longer taxis like this in Amsterdam can be quite enjoyable, and when you manage it well and you plan it properly and you feel like you've done a good job, then it's a very satisfying thing to complete. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful for you. There'll be more videos and tutorials to come on this channel. I'll be streaming both X-Plane 11 and Microsoft Flight Simulator in the near future. Also, I had a lot of people asking how could they be informed about joining in on the group flight I did recently. Well, what I'm going to do before the next one is I'll make a community post. So if you subscribe to the channel and you make sure that you have all notifications turned on, so the little bell logo next to subscribe, and that should, I'm hoping, let you know when I make a community post, and that way you'll be able to see when the next one will be, because I'll put it on there. As always, I hope you have enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video very soon. Bye bye.